Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ask Your Injury Lawyers, where we feature some of the top attorneys to answer all of your top questions. Today, we've got two fantastic attorneys part of the program, and one of the topics that we're going to be covering is all things labor law. And for those that don't know what labor law is, that involves the various trades and injuries that can occur while working on a job site. And we've got some of the leading attorneys that handle those types of cases to help us understand that a little bit better and to help us to understand if the situations that ourselves or even some of your families are in, if in fact these would be covered under the labor law. A little housekeeping first, just to show anyone who's brand new to our program how the program works. This show is live. And what we do is we field your questions live as well. So as the show is progressing, you are welcome to actually ask any of the attorneys any questions that you would like. To do that, all you have to do is comment below. So if you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook or any other place, right below the video, you'll see an area where you can comment. This is the place where you guys can actually submit your questions. The attorneys and myself will be able to see these questions and we'll bring them live onto the show for the attorneys to answer. It's a pretty great format. We've been having a blast connecting with our community by way of this show. So you can start early right now by actually already submitting your questions for us to review and actually to bring into the show. But also we would like you to let me know, can you hear me? Can you see me? That's so important. Connectivity is a big part of what we do here since the show is live. So if you can see me, and you can hear me, do me a favor. Just let me know. Say, yes, I can hear you. Yes, I can see you. And let's get right to it. I'd like to actually introduce you guys to Mark Freeley. Mark, how you doing, bud?
Hey, Rob. How you doing, man?
I am doing well, my friend. And now, for everyone who's brand new, at this point, I think the entire world knows who you are. Either they have seen you on this show, or they have seen you as a connection to your very famous dog, Storm. But for the very few people who don't know who you are, let everyone know who you are and what firm you represent.
Well, I'm an attorney with Buttafuoco Associates, one of the senior partners there. Besides Dan, there's me and there's Jim McCarthy as the partners. But I've been with Dan since I was a student at Hofstra Law. And in 1988, I think, I started as a law clerk there and became a lawyer there. I was admitted in December of 89, and I've been there ever since. So very few of my Hofstra Law classmates have stayed in the same firm doing the same type of law for their entire legal career, which now is 30 years, and I made the right choice. It's been great working with Dan.
Now, Mark, I know that you've handled a tremendous amount of cases that fall under this category of labor law. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what that is and might be thinking, well, labor law, does that mean you protect my employment? Could you just give us just a quick sort of like a definition of what is labor law?
Well, I think another way to characterize it, it's the safe place to work laws. Basically, New York State is one of a very few number of states that have special protections for workers that engage in dangerous activity, such as construction work. So any workers who are working in the trades, carpentry, painting, steel workers, electricians, laborers, you name it, any of the trades, they are entitled to special protection under the law to make sure that their work site is safe and they are provided with the proper and adequate safety devices so they can do their dangerous work during the day and go back to their family safely at the end of their workday.
Now, New York, I would imagine more than, most states probably would require there to be more laws to protect any type of, construction workers. We're right outside of Manhattan. So there's a lot of work that does sort of go in there. Now, because of that, are there laws different for labor law in New York versus other states? Or is this one of those cases where it's a universal law that governs everyone regardless of where you live?
No, it's very specific to New York and a handful of other states. New Jersey doesn't have any of these special protections. So if you get involved in a construction accident on New Jersey side of the George Washington Bridge, you don't have a case. If you're doing the same exact work and you're not given the proper adequate protection and safety devices on the New York side of the GW Bridge, you might have a fabulous case. So that is very specific to New York.
Now, does it matter, though, where the person lives? Could the person live in New Jersey, but the accident happened in New York?
Absolutely. I've had a half dozen of those Jersey workers coming to New York, work in the city, and get hurt falling off an unsecured ladder, a scaffold that collapses, being forced to work in unsafe conditions. And yes, even though they live in New Jersey, they get their workers' compensation. But in addition to that, they may also have a right to go after the building owner and the general contractor, who are strictly liable to make sure that the work site is safe for these brave workers doing this hard work.
Now, to help us understand a little bit about the history of labor law, we'd like to introduce Dan Buttafuoco. Dan Buttafuoco, welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. It's good to be on with you.
Hey, Dan.
Dan, we're talking about labor law. Could you just share with me a little bit about the history of labor law? Like, how did this law come into effect?
Yes, I was listening to some of the things that Mark said, and I just wanted to clarify and supplement what Mark said. He's absolutely right that New Jersey does not have the same protections as New York. But also, you may not realize that there are other groups that are covered, such as window washers and even painters. We've had a few window washer cases. And as far as whether you have a case in New Jersey or not, Mark is absolutely correct. You don't have strict liability if you get hurt on a construction site outside of New York. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't have a case. It just means that you have to then prove negligence on somebody that caused the accident, somebody who's not your employer. So it's a little bit more technical, a lot harder to do. And we always say we love the labor law because it makes our job as lawyers a lot easier, and we can focus on the value of the case, which is another big job, but we don't have to concentrate on proving negligence. Proving negligence is not always easy, especially in a construction situation, because people typically say things like, well, that ladder wasn't ours. Well, really, all of a sudden, it's not your ladder? Or we don't know why he was using that, or whatever. They make up a bunch of stories. We actually had one case, which was actually pretty funny, except for the fact that the guy was hurt, but we managed to win it. But they claimed the guy showed up to work as a volunteer. Do you remember that case, Mark?
Yeah.
That the guy just showed up and started working just on his own, like he wasn't a worker. Like, how ridiculous. But this is the type of stuff they say on these very complicated construction sites. You remember that one, Mark?
I do. I mean, and it just goes to show that they will say anything to try to get out of having to pay someone for the injuries they caused.
Well,
right
you
now,
have a good point there. Sorry to interrupt, but you're saying that they will say anything. You know, this job sites like in the construction injury, I mean, you would think, I'm thinking anyway, that they're pretty dangerous environments. So why is it that these labor law cases that you guys have, the injuries are just so incredibly serious? They're so tragic. If you have a labor law case, it's typically, you know, there's a loss of a limb. Like, why is this?
I think the simple answer is time is money. And you know what? If you're going to slow down the progression of the work site by making sure that it's perfectly safe for everybody, that costs the GC money, it costs the building owner money. And so, you know, it's a hurry up and get it done yesterday attitude on the construction sites. You know, get it done as quickly, as simply as possible. And if you're the squeaky wheel asking for someone else to hold the ladder so it doesn't fall while you're on it, or asking for a scaffold instead of working off a shaky ladder, guess who's not working on the next job? You.
Interesting. So what?
Let me answer your question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me answer your question about why these laws are in place in the first place.
Sure.
Right. This goes back to the late 1800s, right around the 1890s, way before I was practicing. It's starting to seem like it wasn't that long before I was practicing, but yes, it was before I was practicing. And what happened was, because New York was a hot spot for immigration, they were importing workers from all over the country. At that time, Irish and Italian workers. And what would happen, and the history of the law is such, that they would allow these people to work in very unsafe conditions. We've all seen those pictures, the very iconic, famous photos of those workers perched on an iron beam building the Empire State Building, eating their lunch. You've seen those photos.
My grandfather helped build that and some of the bridges.
Right
up the boat from Ireland.
Exactly. And you've seen those photos, and they're sitting there in the suspended, 1,000 feet in the air, and they're having their lunch with no safety harness on, building these gigantic bridges and these large skyscrapers. And you say, how is that possible? How are they crazy enough to do that? The answer is they needed to feed their families. They needed to work. And you know what? The guys, they sort of had bragging rights, who was the most courageous, who was the most reckless, and they would balance on these beams, and some would fall off. And so what happened over time, when these people would get hurt, this was even before workers' comp, when they died, the family really had no source of income. And it was just a tragedy because people were being catapulted into poverty. In fact, that somewhat happens still today in any type of serious accident. So what the lawmakers said, and New York being a fairly sort of modernized, progressive state, they said, we got to protect these people. And what they did is they passed these laws that, as Mark said, they put the costs on the burdens on the general contractor and on the owners of these projects, because they had the money and they were in a position to make sure that these things would get done correctly, because the subs, they didn't have a lot of money and they would break all the rules and you could never find them. They would just go out of business. So they put it on the general contractor, which was usually a big company, and the owner. If you own land in Manhattan, you're a big company, you're rich by definition, big company. So they put the liability on them for them to make sure that the subs are focused on safe practices. So that's the genesis of the law. And once that was in place, it caught on. And there are exceptions. It's not every building, by the way. It's only commercial buildings. It does not apply to 1 and 2 family houses. So homeowners don't have to worry about liability. But any type of office building or 3 families or better, the labor law is in effect, and it has to be one of the a recognized activity, which I'm sure Mark could talk about more later on.
Just to remind everyone, we're here with attorneys Daniel Buttafuoco and Mark Freeley. Currently, we're talking about the labor law, construction sites, the various trades and the laws that protect the tradesmen. And if you guys have any questions, we are live. We're going to be able to field your questions live. So both Mark and Dan are welcome. And I'm going to be putting them on the hot seat to be able to answer any questions that you guys have. It's really simple. Just comment your questions below and we'll bring it into the show. Earlier, you were mentioning these GCs and building owners. We had someone who asked a question. What does the law require actually from building owners and general contractors?
Well, it's to provide a safe work environment for the worker. And it depends on the particular work. If you're working from a height, if there's a gravity related risk, there has to be certain protections. If the ladder must be secure and stable, and depending on what height you're working from and the type of ladder, it has to be secured from sway at the bottom or at the top. That's just one of the things. If you're working on a bottom level and there's workers working above you, there has to be certain protections to prevent items, tools, construction debris from falling on top of your head. And we've had those cases. So it all depends. There's also the New York Code rules and regulations set forth what are the responsibilities. And there's slipping and tripping on things that shouldn't be there on the ground, or being forced to work in slippery or icy conditions when you're doing dangerous work already. So there's an evolution of the law, and every year these laws get reinterpreted by the courts in New York State. It's ever evolving, and we go to continuing legal education seminars every year. I take 1 or 2 courses on it just to stay up to date on it. But when we're talking about construction, these cases, they don't have to be on an actual construction site. When we talk about a construction site, it can be repairs, alteration, demolition. It doesn't have to be, we're building a brand new building. It could be, we're putting an addition onto a building. We're taking some of the building down and putting a portion up. or it could be simply, like Dan said, painting. It could be wiring. It could be installing a new alarm system. As long as it's integral to the building, if it's making an alteration that's substantial to the building, that's what the courts are looking at to see if it's going to be a protected activity.
Mark, what types of trades are covered? Or better yet, maybe a better question is, are there any trades that are not covered under the labor law?
No, all the trades are covered. What the courts are going to look to is what the activity was that was being performed. That's what really the test is.
We've had cases where people were inspecting work, but they were considered part of the trades, and we were able to get them covered under the labor law. We also, as Mark was talking about falling objects, we had a case where a guy was beamed on the head from a very high height with a falling object. It split his helmet in half, and he suffered a brain injury. I mean, he wasn't completely brain damaged, but he had a significant TBI, traumatic brain injury. We settled that case, and the guy went back to Africa and bought the entire village. That's where he lived.
And wow. In that case, that happened in he was working in the bottom of an elevator shaft.
Yeah.
And there's actually special laws about protections of people working in shafts as well. And so if you're working in a shaft, there has to be durable planking every other floor. So if something does fall from above, it's only falling a maximum of 2 floors.
But I thought it was really interesting, though, when he got his massive settlement, we try to always do financial planning for the clients because we don't want them to take a gigantic sum of money that they're not used to having and blow it, But this guy was actually very cool. He spoke 6 or 7 languages, I think, right, Mark? and he looked like an actor. He was a very, very tall, well-built, handsome guy. And he told us he was going to put the money in a bank in Africa. Remember that? And we begged that, we pleaded with him. We said, please don't do that. Even though it's not our money, after all this work, he goes, no, I know what I'm doing. And when I last talked to him, because we kept in touch with him, and he did manage to get a lot better, he bought the entire village where he came from. And of course, he put his mom and his sister and his uncles and aunts all in houses. I just thought that was really cool because I like the fact that we were able to make a real significant impact in this guy's life from being, he was basically just a laborer, even though he was intelligent. When he comes here, he wasn't even, I don't know if he was even a documented citizen. I don't remember, but clearly here he wasn't educated, even though he was intelligent. He spoke 7 languages, but at home he went back and became the chief, and that was just really cool, I thought.
You make a really good point. We had a question that come in earlier, and earlier you had mentioned that the labor law was really developed on the heels of, we had the influx of immigrants coming in, and of our country was really just built off of all of that. So one of the questions that came in is, do you have to be a U.S. citizen to be protected under their labor law?
No, that doesn't make a difference. As long as you're doing the work that the law looks at, the protected activity, you are covered under the New York State labor law. And you don't have to be in a union. There's plenty of non-union jobs there. And unfortunately, those job sites are less supervised and tend to be a whole lot less safe. So what you end up having is that undocumented workers end up working on these non-union jobs, and you wouldn't want to walk on one of those sites, Rob. Let me tell you, the things that we've seen and the conditions, the risks that these people are forced to take just to support themselves is crazy, really crazy. And
we had one guy who was on a site in Brooklyn, and he was shooting a nail gun, which was the improper gun, into cement, and with no eye protection. And the nail gun ricocheted, as you would expect, off the wall into his eye.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, just, who you wouldn't send, and no offense to dogs, Mark, but you wouldn't send a dog to work like that. I mean, and what happens is a lot of these dishonest, and they are dishonest, the subcontractors, they hire these workers for off the books for very insignificant wages, considering the job they're doing, right? And they're happy to have the work to people, but they place them in these precarious situations where it's very dangerous to work, as Mark was just saying. And, then when you go to sue them, they're nowhere to be found. And that's why it's the responsibility of the owner and the general contractor. Now, I had that one case. Remember the Chinese guy that we had? The guy spoke no English. It was a Chinese pastor who referred us the case. And Mark, we went into his house. And I remember this like yesterday because his house was so small, they had to give like Mark a box to sit on. And Mark fell off the box.
Oh my God.
We almost had a case there. No, I'm just kidding. That was actually pretty funny. But this was a wonderful human being. He came to America with his wife to escape the draconian laws in China regarding the one-child policy. They were going to give his wife a forced abortion. I don't know if you remember that, Mark. And they were smuggled here in a shipping container. And I said, oh my God, these poor people come here, smuggled in a shipping container, a man and a pregnant woman, his wife, and they come here and she's working in a nail salon. She spoke a little bit of English. He spoke no English. They put this guy on a makeshift scaffold. You remember that thing? It was basically a board balanced, I don't know how, 29 feet high. He fell and broke his neck.
Yep.
It's a miracle from God that he was not paralyzed. But I remember thinking, when I was sitting with this guy and when Mark fell off the chair, which actually was a light moment, but how we had to help this man. Like this guy was relying on us. Now, we didn't speak Chinese. We didn't speak Mandarin. So what do? We hired an interpreter. And every time he wanted to talk to us, the guy would call the interpreter and the interpreter would call us. The clock would start running and we would pay the interpreter. And that was how we communicated, because we speak like 7 languages in the office, but we don't speak Mandarin. So anyway, we got the case resolved, got him a pile of money, and he went on to recover, and we changed his whole life. But it's very rewarding, these cases, to do them, because it's justice. It's really a form of serious justice.
Yeah.
But what happens with? Go ahead, Bob.
No, go ahead. I was just going to remind everyone we're on with Mark Freeley and Dan Buttafuoco. We're talking about all things labor law, construction accidents, involving any people within the various trades, and all the things that we're talking about. What's something that's really great about Buttafuoco Associates is that this information we make available to the public as a public resource. And I'm sure Mark and Dan, you love seeing your faces like this here. But this is their website. You can actually review more information even after the show by going to 1-800-NOW-HURT.com. And we've got a whole section right here labeled construction accidents. And some of the topics that we've already covered are here. For example, things like falling objects. Now, let me just get back here. Here we go. Now, Mark, I've got a question for you that came in. I'd like to actually bring it up. And it's sort of 2 questions. The first is why, if the law already exists, why do construction workers or any tradesmen, why does it require a construction accident or construction injury lawyer?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And it's really because the laws are so specific and they're always being updated and changed in terms of the court's interpretation of the laws. And, whether falling off a ladder in this situation or on a different set of facts is going to be covered under the law. And so that's why we go to the continuing legal education programs yearly. So you need to have a lawyer that really knows the law and when a case is a case and what you need to prove for a particular injury or accident to be covered under the law. You could have a great case, and if you go to the wrong lawyer that just handles car accidents, they'll never know that you had this great case. And so that's one of the reasons. Number 2, you really have to have a lawyer that is almost half investigator. It's not just knowing the law. It's having the drive to investigate and get to the truth. And not every lawyer wants to put all that work in. And when I say all that work, we're talking these labor law cases. It could take 3, 4, 5 years. I could be doing 3, 4, 5, 6 days of depositions of witnesses. I'm going to accident scenes, and we'll talk about some of the accident scenes that I've gone to and what I did to investigate these cases to actually find out there were cases and to prove the case. But I think investigation is huge. I mean, the law has always been in my blood. My dad was a city cop. His brother was a city cop. My godfather was a city cop. My dad's brother was one of the head homicide detectives in Fort Apache, the Bronx. When I was in college, I interned for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and I watched the prosecutors do what they did down there in Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and that really clinched it for me. The next year, I wanted to see the other side of the coin, and I went to the Rockland County Public Defender's Office. Again, investigation. I learned so many different investigation techniques, and I just got that drive to get to the bottom of a case, no matter what the case was. And those were criminal cases. But I turned that passion into the civil side, working with Dan, and these construction site accident cases. Listen, anybody can handle a case. If someone stopped at a red light and they get hit in the rear, how much investigation do you really need to do? But on these cases where no one's telling the truth, there's documents are not being provided, photos are being destroyed. I mean, you really have to put the time in to get to the truth. And that's why I love these construction site accident cases. That you were putting together a puzzle, chip by chip, and it takes a long time. And I don't know, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of lawyers that are willing to put that much time and effort in to one individual case. And so that's why it's really important to get the right attorney that has the knowledge of the construction site law, but also the drive and the motivation to get to the truth and to do all the investigation necessary.
That is absolutely correct. And, it's funny, Mark talked about, how you have to know whether there is a case. We get referrals from other lawyers who can't handle these cases or don't want to or don't know enough about them. I remember there was one firm out in Suffolk County in the Brentwood area. It was just like a mill. I call it a mill. They just had a lot of activity, but nothing really going on. And they said to me, we would go there every Thursday and we would talk to them about some cases they wanted to give us. So I went there one time with my other partner, Jim McCarthy, and we walked in. It was really funny. It was a Thursday night. I'll never forget this. And they said, hi, Dan and Jim. We have the files all set up for you in the library. There's 7 cases you're going to look at. The first 6 are great cases, and the last case is definitely not a case, but the guy won't go away. So can you just tell him he doesn't have a case because we're sick of talking to him? So I said, sure, whatever I can do. Well, Jim and I, we looked at the files, we looked at the cases, and it was exactly the opposite of what they said. The first 6 were not cases, and the last case we settled for millions. And the guy's name was Jimmy Q. I won't tell you his last name. And I looked at them with disbelief, and I'm like, are you kidding? You're telling me to tell this guy he doesn't have a case? He not only has a case, he has an amazing case. And we won that case on paper, actually. It was a guy who fell through a skylight, and he had 2 fused wrists, horrible injuries, and we got him a pile of money. And they were astonished that we were able to make money on that. And the other cases that they said were cases were complete nonsense. So it goes to show you. I mean, I'll never forget that. I laughed about that, but I imagine that must be going on all across New York State.
Well, I got a question for you. I mean, obviously, you guys are very, very good at what you do. You're one of the, 2 of the leading labor law attorneys in the state. Is it common for people to have these cases maybe with other lawyers that maybe don't practice in this area, where they end up switching to you guys? Is that an easy process? What does that look like?
It's an easy process, and we have taken over, and we do on a routine basis take over all different types of accident cases from other lawyers when the clients finally realize that this lawyer doesn't seem to have a real grasp of what's going on.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times, they're not getting phone calls back. They're not being kept up to date on the status of the case.
Yeah.
But, changing lawyers is an easy, painless process. And I think some people don't do it because they think, well, now I got to pay 2 lawyers a legal fee. And it's absolutely not true. We have to split the 1/3 legal fee with the previous lawyer based upon the percentage of work that each firm did. But I think that clients are smart. they may end up with the wrong attorney in the beginning because someone told them, oh my gosh, you got to call my brother-in-law. He's the best. And then when they see the brother-in-law not really doing the due diligence, and that's when we talk about investigation, pushing, and being motivated to make the case and make it a winnable case.
Mm-hmm.
Clients see that. You know if your lawyer is doing everything possible to win the case. And this all goes back to the drive. And in these construction accident cases, investigation is key. I mean, I don't know if Dan remembers, but when I was in my last year at Hofstra Law, Dan had offered me a job, and there was another law clerk that was also offered the job, and I didn't know if he was going to take it, and if he took it, I didn't know what I was going to do. But I had applied to the FBI. This is in my blood, law enforcement, and I really thought I was going to be in the FBI or a detective. I wasn't going to law school. I wasn't sure I was going to be a lawyer, and I applied to the FBI. I went down fully square. I took all the tests. I passed the psychological. They did an extensive background search. And the next step was to go to Quantico for training. And they had promised me that I would be a New York field office agent, which was my dream. And then what happens that the other law clerk decided that they didn't want to do what the proper type of law, the civil practice that we do. And some people call it ambulance chasing. I don't see that as all. I see helping the small guy up against the big guy, and I love it. 30 years later, I love taking on these big guys for the small guy. And you know what? And then they sent me a letter saying, listen, we can't promise you the New York field office. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to be on stakeout in Oklahoma. Dan, here I am, and here we are 30 years later. But I love the investigative part of the cases.
Yeah, I think it's 31 years. And you know what? I think you're like the greatest hire I ever had, Mark, or at least one of them. It's been a good friendship and a good partnership. But Mark's 100% right. I mean, we had a case once where, well, first of all, any lawyer can settle a $6 million case for $1 million and think he did a great job. Mm. That's not what we're talking about,
And the client won't know that's not a great job, right?
Well, let's tell.
That's a great point.
Right. Let's tell the famous story about David O. We won't mention the last name, but David O. was represented by a fairly well-known lawyer in Suffolk, and he had a scaffold case. He fell off the scaffold, and of course, Mark and I were working on it. I don't know if you could hear the baby in the background crying, but that's my new granddaughter. But anyway, so we had the case, and the case was 3 years old, right? 3 years old. And he told me, he was in my office crying. He said, my lawyer wants me to take $600,000. Not only does he want me to take it, he's calling my sister who referred him the case. It's always the sister referring a boyfriend or whatever. And he's telling her, make him take the money. He says, I can't take the money. I was a handicapped child. Never forget this case. He said, and by the time I pay the workers' comp lien, I think I only get like $100,000 in my pocket or $200,000 in my pocket. I said, we could do better. So Mark and I start working on the case. I remember this like yesterday. Even this case is a few years old. Mark comes into my office. He said, Dan, he goes, I think our client has a brain injury that was undiagnosed. I said, really? Why? He says, I keep having the same conversation with him every day, and it's like we never had the conversation. Remember that, Mark?
Yeah, I do.
And so it was only a week. We had the case a week. Well, we started looking into the brain injury. We diagnosed the traumatic brain injury. We got him the right treatment. We got him the right doctors. We spent $350,000 on that case, and we settled it for $5 million. And let me tell you something. Not only that, we even moved the client to an Indian reservation, a Native American reservation, because his wife was Native American, and we got him free health care. And we did everything possible for this guy. And at the end of this case, he was like a different human being because he was on the right medication. He could never work again, but at least his family was provided for. He wasn't worried. And instead of a $600,000 settlement, which would have put $200,000 maybe in his pocket, he ended up with a $5 million settlement and a changed life. And that's what this is about.
Mm. Yeah.
And then, of course, the other lawyer had to fight me on the fee.
Yeah.
I said, no, you're going to get a third of $600,000. And that's exactly what the judge awarded him.
Yeah. Now, both of you, just like everyone else in the firm, genuinely cares about people. But I think like what we're talking about today, I think what it does is it translates to people that, a great lawyer, and I'll define that in a second, but a great lawyer is worth their weight in gold, because a great lawyer is not just an attorney, but he is well educated on the medical field. They're almost like doctors as well. They're investigators as well. But great lawyers are also highly empathetic towards their clients, which goes to the moniker for Buttafuoco Associates. We help accident victims rebuild their lives. Now, Mark, I know that you care very much about what you do. You absolutely love what you do, but you genuinely care about people. And we've talked about some great cases and some really great moments, but I know that you've also had some hard situations and some really sad cases. Would you mind sharing with us maybe one of the saddest cases that you've had to work on as it relates to to labor law?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still in touch with the client. It's probably been 5 years now, but she still sends me updated photos of her two boys every Christmas. Just salt of the earth family. But basically, Dan and I went into Brooklyn to meet with Janice. At that time, she had two little boys. They were probably 3 and 5 years old at the time. And her husband, construction worker, had a tragic work-related accident doing construction up at West Point, believe it or not. And she didn't really know that many details about what happened. Other than that, he had fallen, had gone into a coma, and sadly had passed away. I think it was about 2 days later. And that's what we knew. We knew nothing else. And we had to investigate this from scratch. So I went to work and I put my investigative skills to work. And I eventually got my construction site expert involved. And I took a road trip to West Point with my expert. After many FOIL requests, Freedom of Information requests and demands, I was permitted access to the West Point campus. And ended up meeting with the military personnel over there. I was given access to the involved ladder that my client, an A-frame ladder that my client, the deceased client, the husband of Janice, had fallen from. And then we were taken over to the site of the accident, and I was able to learn exactly what type of ladder he was on and how it happened and what he was doing. And I found out that he was doing some demolition in the ceiling area, taking out old piping off of, I forget if it was a 6 or an 8-foot frame, A-frame ladder, which he should not have been doing that extreme heavy lifting off of a ladder with no one holding it. And it wasn't secured. He should have been given a baker scaffold, a platform to work on, so he could lift this piping, heavy piping, out of the ceiling. So the ladder had fallen over, and he had hit his head on the cement ground, and he had got a subdural hematoma, and he passed away from it. Mm-hmm. So we did a lot of investigation to find out the cause. I took a lot of depositions, and I worked with my expert, and I proved that it was a covered activity under the labor law. We did not need to sue United States of America because there was as the owner, we sued the general contractor who had hired the company that Janice's husband had worked for. And after years and years and years, we ended up going to a mediation, and we got a substantial settlement for Janice and her two little boys, enough so that she was able to move out of the little tiny apartment in Brooklyn and buy a nice house in Pennsylvania, moved her and the boys to Pennsylvania, and is now living a life that she doesn't have to worry about economics anymore. Mm. And I still feel good every day about helping that family.
Wow.
I remember her, and I also get those phone calls and cards from her every Christmas. Wonderful woman, and a very tragic case. I think one of the things that you have to realize is we actually become friends with our clients. Sadly, one of my best friends was my client, and we buried him yesterday. And I did my first ever virtual funeral. I delivered the eulogy for my client, my first ever virtual eulogy for a dear friend of mine. This file never left my desk. It was a case I settled against MetLife 32 years ago. We've been friends since 1987. I was at his kids' weddings. He was at my kids' weddings, and he unfortunately died from the COVID-19 virus because many of our clients are pretty compromised in terms of their general health. And he walked with a cane. He wasn't cardiovascular, strong. And sadly, the virus took his life. I really will miss this man. And by the way, I used to have lunch with him every 3 months, even though the case was over. It was just one of those things. But that just shows, I mean, we are not just treating this casually. And obviously, we can't befriend every one of our clients to that level. But this was one of my best friends, and he started out as a client. So we invested emotionally in our clients' cases. They tell you not to get emotionally involved. I think that's ridiculous. I think that's a cop-out. If you don't get emotionally involved in your clients' cases, then you don't care. And I can't be that person.
Yeah,
I want to be emotionally involved. That's what drives me to do a good job. And same for Mark. And I admire that about you, Mark, by the way. It's very true.
Yeah, well, with the situations that you guys deal with, I would imagine that it would be almost impossible because, these are cases that you guys are working with in many cases for years. They're very, many of them are very serious in nature. So you get to not just develop relationships with the client, but the client's family as well. So how can you not develop some type of emotional connection?
Right. I've cried during my summations on some of these cases. You can't overdo it because then it looks like you're trying to milk it. But sometimes you can't help it. This is life. This is life, limb, and property, and serious things that are going on here.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, the clients, when you're talking about clients that are involved with serious accidents and really debilitating injuries, their lives are turned upside down, Rob, and they're relying on us. They're relying on us, yes, to win the case at the end.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of time that goes by between when we first sign up with those people to say, yes, we're going to take on this case and do our very best, to the time that we get to the finish line. And you've got to be there every step of the way because there's a lot of low periods in these people's lives. I mean, if they're living a certain life one day and the next day the rug is pulled out from underneath them, what the heck? I mean, they're not getting a paycheck. Workers' comp fights them tooth and nail. They're making a fraction on comp that they used to make, or comp cuts them off and now they're not getting any money in. They're having a hard time putting food on the table or paying the rent. And you've got to be creative. You've got to be there for them. You've got to let them call you on your cell phone on a Saturday or text you on a Friday night. I had one client, I think at the end of the case, we were joking about it because we became friends, and I think I had 1,000 texts. But on the 4th of July, we had one. I mean, so you have to be there for people, and you have to put yourself in their shoes and say, wow, you know what? They have to feel a sense of control. So yes, you have to keep them up to date on what the heck is going on. Where are we in the case? What's the next step? How much longer is it going to be? Are we going to get there? And you have to help them think baby steps through the case to get to the finish line. We will get to the finish line. It takes a lot of hand holding, but you have to have the time and the patience and the desire to be there for your client to get them to the finish line.
Now, great personal injury lawyering is more than just receiving or getting maximum compensation for your clients, although that is the obvious result. What are some of the other things that you guys do to help all of your clients sort of, rebuild their lives, as your motto says?
Did I just see a chicken go by your window?
I was just going to say that. Before we answer that question, we got to tell Rob that there's a chicken in your window behind you, sir.
So, yeah, this is a good opportunity here. I'll readdress the audience. Guys, I want to thank everyone for tuning in The show is live, and yes, we're doing these shows all remotely because this is during the quarantine sort of shutdown in New York. So I'm doing it from my house, and I know both Dan and Mark are doing it from their houses. And yes, it is true. I actually do have chickens among many other animals, and I believe you're not there right now, but it is very likely that every now and then you might get a chicken. You might even get a goat. Who knows? Somebody might go by that window.
I have a statue.
Listen, I'm all set up as a doomsday prepper. So when things went down and the price of eggs went up, nothing changed for me because I get more than enough eggs a day anyway.
You'll have to send me some eggs, but the statue I don't have to feed. But, that's a little lighthearted humor in the middle of a serious subject. Yeah. Well, I forgot the question at this point.
No, my question was, and it has to do with, being a great personal injury lawyer is more than just, receiving maximum compensation on behalf of your clients. What are some of the other things that you do to help your clients rebuild their life?
Well, it's actually funny, some of the things we do. It's sort of comical. Well, we do the obvious. We get them to the right doctors. We help them pay their medical bills. We make creative arrangements for them to pay their medical bills. We make sure that they are seeing the right specialists, because we've had, like the case I just pointed out, the guy had a brain injury and didn't even know it. We got them to the right professionals. We've had clients go to surgeons because they're treating with chiropractors they've become an annuity for the chiropractor, who's just adjusting them and sending them on their way, or the physical therapist, and they're not getting any better. Look, if the 6 months of physical therapy, if you got radiating pain shooting down your arms and you can't sleep, you should see a surgeon. I mean, it's just basic medicine. So they can't access these doctors on their own. So we have arrangements with people that are world famous, and I'm not overstating that. These are world famous doctors that people come from all over the world to sit and meet with them. If you go in the waiting room, there are people from Argentina, Brazil, Europe, you name it, Canada, where they, try to get away from their healthcare system and access our doctors. And we sometimes fund complicated surgeries if we have to. So we do that, but we even do odd things. Like one guy we literally moved. I talked about moving the one person to the Indian reservation, the Native American reservation, but we actually moved a motorcycle accident guy who had he worked off the books. He had no health insurance, no fault, because there's no fault in motorcycle accidents. He had very bad injuries. He had no Social Security because he never paid into the system. And of course, no health insurance, and nobody wants to treat him under Medicaid. We literally moved him to Florida. I mean, literally, like we got the trucks, we signed the lease, and we got his butt to an isolated place in Florida where he could afford the rent. And then we funded his existence for 3.5 years until we settled his case for multiple millions of dollars. We do all kinds of crazy stuff. We hook people up with churches. We've gotten them meals. We've gotten them cars. We've gotten them storage. You just name it. If it's a need and it comes up in the context of the case, in order to hold their hand and get them through the litigation, we're willing to do it. As long as it's not illegal or unethical, we're willing to do it. That's basically it.
Mark, I got a question for you. So for someone who is in need of a construction injury lawyer, either for themselves or they have a family member or a friend who was, victim of sort of, this type of negligence here, what should they be looking for when hiring a lawyer? So this is for someone who either maybe already has a lawyer, maybe they're unhappy, or they don't have a lawyer yet, and they're just starting that process. When they're doing their own investigation to land on that right lawyer, what are the top things that they should be looking for?
Well, you have to make sure that the lawyer that you choose has a track record of success handling construction site accident cases. That's the bottom line. So, I mean, talk to the lawyer, ask him, how many of these cases have you handled? What have been the results? Ask him about the types of cases. Look on the website and see if they've got a track record of handling these types of cases. But you can't just dip your toes in this type of law. You have to immerse yourself in it. You have to know this stuff cold, and you have to continually keep up to date on it. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard for clients because I see a lot of times they'll go to one lawyer and the lawyer doesn't really handle it. but they'll take the case anyway. And then all of a sudden they'll say, oh yeah, well, I'm working with my friend John. And maybe John dabbles in a little bit. And you don't really know who your lawyer is. I mean, you want to have a relationship with your lawyer. You want to know that lawyer's on your case from day one until the end of the case, and is going to be with you every step of the way. So when you have questions, you get immediate, straightforward, honest answers about what's going on and what's the next step. So, just be careful with your homework and make sure that the lawyer that you handle is the lawyer that's going to be handling your case on a day-to-day basis.
Let me add two more things too. You don't want a young lawyer. Problem with the internet, and this is really a source of annoyance to me, is that everybody who has a law degree thinks they can go out and settle $1 million cases, and they sometimes they run into hospitals, get cases illegally, or through family members. And there's a lot of brokering that tries to go on and illegal things. But, you don't want a lawyer that's practicing less than 5 years unless he's part of a big firm. That's number one. And there's a reason for that. Not only lack of experience or knowledge or credibility in the courtroom or courtroom power, but number two, they don't have the money to bring these cases. And we sort of touched on it about how we spend money. We laid out $350,000 of our own money on that one case. If you're not with a firm that can afford, and we have money stored up for this reason. If you're not with a firm that can afford to spend big money on experts and to preserve ladders and to hold on to equipment or to preserve an automobile and store an automobile for years, if your firm doesn't have that kind of resources available, then then fine, give them a whiplash case, but don't give them anything big. A big case should be handled by a big firm with big money, with big experience, big experts, big courtroom reputation, and big results. And that's the bottom line. I mean, it should be obvious to anybody, but you have to have, these cases cost a lot of money. Don't forget, we're not getting paid for 3.5, 4, 5 years sometimes. So we got to carry that case for 5 years. We got to pay all the personnel. Then we got to fund the case, which is thousands and thousands of dollars. I sound like Trump. Thousands and thousands of dollars in expert fees and things like that. And where's that money coming from? You got to have that kind of money. And it's not one case we're doing it with.
Right.
We're doing it with, I don't know, how many cases we got in the office? We have probably 400 cases in the office, right? New York alone.
Yeah.
Right?
What's important is that, and like Dan said, a lot of firms don't spend the money to make the case, and they do it because they don't have it or they don't know any better.
They don't want to spend.
They don't want to spend. I mean, on a construction site accident case, Rob, first thing I'm doing, I'm hiring a construction expert. Right off the bat, you're paying a few $1,000s in a retainer and then an hourly fee for everything that they're doing, helping me prepare for depositions, right? Going over contracts with me, going to the scene of the accident with me, right? But at the end of the day, we're going to win the case because we put the time in, we put the money in for the right expert to get the right information and the right theory of a case. You got to have a theory. You got to start, you got to know so many lawyers, they wait to the end of the case to figure out what their theory is. Are you kidding me? You got to get your theory at the beginning of the case. As soon as the client leaves the office, figure, okay, here's our theory, here's our burden of proof, and start stacking the bricks. And so when you get to the end of the case, you got a brick wall. You don't wait to the end and you start stacking the bricks the day before jury selection. No. It's all going to crumble down. That's so right. We start with the expert construction guy. And then when we get on further in the case, we'll hire a life care planner to figure out what this person's going to need healthcare wise for the rest of their life. Then we're going to take a vocational expert. Can this person ever go back to this type of job? If they can't, what type of jobs are available in a sedentary position? And how much less money do they make in that job? How much less benefits do they get? Right? And then we take that information and then we work with a professor of economics at Stony Brook University. It says, okay, that's what this stuff is going to cost now. What's it going to cost 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And they give us the future value of those losses of of economic losses for the health care that the person's going to need, and also for the economic loss of the loss of wages. It's a lot of work. It's time consuming, but it's the right way to build a case.
That's absolutely right. We've had all kinds of experts. We've actually hired handwriting experts where there's a dispute as to a document. I hired a former KGB agent, handwriting expert in Manhattan, whose apartment was rigged out like a laboratory, and I've hired her a few times, where we had to figure out who signed and who prepared a document or a report. We have hired human factors experts where things were made camouflaged or invisible, and we hired people who were specialists in human factors and what the eye can see. I once hired a dome expert. I had a skylight case. I hired a guy from a university whose entire education was on dome-like structures. He had a doctorate in dome structures. Okay, it's like sort of like the architect who built the chapel in Florence was the first ever dome ever built, and he studied this type of thing. We have had, of course, medical experts, engineering experts, architectural experts. You name it. If it requires an expert, we've had accident reconstruction experts, and we don't chintz out on them. Some of these experts are $20,000 just for a retainer. So we have a battery of experts. In fact, sadly, we just lost one of our experts to COVID. He was an elderly man, not so old. He was actually very much with it, but he was compromised and he developed the virus and sadly succumbed to it. However, he was part of a firm that we have a replacement expert. As sad as it is to see him, we can't sacrifice the client. See him go, we can't sacrifice the client's case. So we have now had to scramble to replace him, but of course we've done it. So the experts are a big part of what we do, because we are not arrogant to the point where we claim we know everything, and we're not afraid to get educated. We're not afraid to go to seminars. We're not afraid to hire experts where we need to get experts. And it's amazing what people are experts in. There's all types of expertise out there. I'm actually shocked at some of the people at their levels of expertise in a very narrow subject, and yet, that's what they know.
I love working with the experts. I mean, metallurgist experts I've worked with 2 or 3 times. A glass expert to tell me why a certain piece of glass broke and injured my client. The high-tech machines and diagnostic tools they use. I've worked with car experts to figure out why a car malfunctioned. Product liability experts, all different types of product cases. And I get to learn, and it's enjoyable and it's different. And that's what I like about this type of law. Every case is different, all different types of accidents and injuries, and it's always different. And I'm not chained to a desk working for some white shoe firm and staring at a screen all day. I'm out in the field, working with experts. I'm going to scenes of accidents. I'm examining defective products. Going to court 3-4 days a week. Holding depositions. Now we're doing lots of video depositions. I did one last week. We're doing video mediation. So yeah, things are changing, but we're still working and we're still pushing cases. And that's what I like about this job, is that I get to do something different every day. It keeps you motivated.
We had that one case. I mentioned the Chinese young man who fell 29 feet, broke his neck. I went personally to the construction site with his wife and him, and they were pretending they didn't know him. There was a regular construction site with maybe 100 people working, and it was probably a 10-story building in Lower Manhattan, and everybody was like, wouldn't talk to me. So I started screaming at the top of my lungs. I said, you guys, somebody better start talking to me, because I'm suing everybody. That's what I said. I made such a stink, as I was so absolutely infuriated that they could hurt this guy and then pretend that they didn't know who he was. I was so offended for him. And he didn't speak any English. He couldn't protect himself. His wife didn't speak any English. I was screaming in that building at the top of my lungs like a lunatic, until finally one of the job foremen came down and said, can I help you? And I said, somebody better tell me that they know who this guy's immediate boss was, or I'm going to the police. I was making threats. I was wild with rage. And finally he said, yeah, I know who it is. And he gave me all the information I wanted, and we were able to win that case. And I started taking pictures, and I walked around there. I wasn't afraid. I walked through there like I owned the place. And people were running to get out of my way because I was so upset that they would actually try to pull something like that. And we got justice for this man. And you have to be willing to do that kind of stuff. Sometimes I've walked out to construction sites and basically I didn't lie, but I told them, made it look like I said, I'm here to inspect. I didn't say for who. And they let me in, and I've been inspecting everything. They didn't know I was inspecting for my client. And I inspected the whole construction site, took pictures, and left like I own the place. They see a guy with a suit, and everybody got out of my way, and I got everything I needed. So you have to be clever. You got to be aggressive, and you got to fight for your client. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah. And I'll tell you have to do that because these cases are getting harder and harder. And I'll tell you why is that the insurance companies, because they end up paying out a lot of money on these, are getting smarter and smarter. So they've got firms on retainer, defense firms, that as soon as there's an accident on a construction site, the first call is to the defense lawyer to run to the scene and speak to the people on the scene to help start the defense for the GC or the owner. And get
rid of the ladder too. The ladder, they're always hiding the ladder.
Yeah, and to get rid of the ladder and to maybe make suggestions. And listen, not every defense lawyer is going to do that, but there's a certain way to talk to people with innuendos about, if it happened this way, maybe you guys are going to be okay. But if it happened that way, well, that's a different story.
Right.
So, you're not telling someone to lie, but you're certainly giving them an opportunity to.
Right. How about that case we got with the airport accident? I don't want to get too specific because that case is still pending. But, it was a death case. Guy left a wife and a young kid. And, the defense lawyer was involved before the guy's body was even cold. It was horrifying.
Wow.
So it makes the investigation a lot tougher.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, we're here with Mark Freeley and Dan Buttafuoco of Buttafuoco Associates, and just the sort of like the home stretch to close things out. Let's turn to some audience questions. One question that came in. I don't know who would like to answer this, Mark or Dan, but this person said, if I was hurt on a job, isn't it just a workers' comp case?
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah. Well, when you're hurt on the job, your first benefit that you're going to get, if you're a W-2 employee, is going to be workers' compensation benefits. Doesn't matter who's at fault or what the injury is, you're entitled to workers' compensation benefits. That comes through the workers' compensation carrier for your employer. Now, you can't sue your employer. Even in these construction site cases, we're not suing employers. There's a workers' compensation bar or prohibition against suing your employer. But if it's someone else's fault besides your employer, you get your workers' compensation from your employer, and you may have the right to seek compensation for your pain and suffering through another party. So on these cases, these construction site cases, these people are getting workers' compensation through the contractor they work for, but they may also have a case against the general contractor or the building owner under the labor law. The same thing with a slip and fall. If you slip and fall at work and it's because a co-employee made a mess, well, then you get your workers' comp and that's it. But if there's an outside cleaning company that came in and mopped and created and left this wet, slippery condition and you slipped on it, well, then you get your compensation from your employer, but you may also have what's called a third-party case. That's the litigation part that we handle against the company that caused or created the slippery condition.
Right. That's the term I wanted to hear you say, and you said it. It's called a third-party case. Whatever you heard at work, you get comp. But what you really want to have, the big case, is called the third-party case. And when you settle the third-party case, you have to pay back all your comp benefits at the end. So what occurs is called a workers' compensation lien. For every benefit that is paid to you on your workers' compensation case by your employer's carrier or insurance company, we say carrier because that's a term we use, but just another word for an insurance company. When the insurance company or carrier pays you those benefits, it accumulates an amount, and that becomes a lien on the third-party case. And at the end of the third-party case, we pay back all or some of that. You can negotiate it. Usually, we get at least a third off. And there are various requirements and laws that can even reduce that lien further, depending on how many benefits you'd have going forward and things like that. It's really similar, in fact, to a no-fault case. If you get in a car accident, right, the car that you're in, the carrier or the insurance company for the car that you're in is the no-fault carrier. That pays your bills, pays your lost wages, that they're supposed to. Half the time they don't. And it pays your medical bills, right? And then you also have a third-party case or a tort case, a liability case, a negligence case against the guy who caused the accident or gal. So it's the same idea, pretty similar idea. One pays your bills and your immediate out-of-pocket expenses, your lost wages. The other one pays you a lump sum settlement. Same idea.
Now, is there an SOL on labor law? And if you file a workers' comp, do you forfeit your labor law case?
SOL, big word.
Statute, yeah. So I guess you're talking about statute of limitations.
Yeah.
So in New York State, it would be a 3-year statute of limitations from the day of your accident for a construction site labor law case. Yeah, and almost every case in New York, except for medical malpractice or intentional tort, has a 3-year statute of limitations in New York State.
Right, it's different in every state, the statute of limitations.
And the second part of the question was, if you file for workers' comp, do you forfeit the right to pursue a labor law case?
No, you get your comp from your employer. And if you meet the criteria for a labor law case, then we pursue the case on your behalf against the at-fault parties.
Simultaneously, you have both at once tracked together.
Okay. Like I would imagine that, and maybe you guys will not agree with me, but I would imagine that there's a number of people who file for workers' comp not even realizing that they also have a third-party case. Is that common?
Yeah, and I would recommend anybody that gets hurt on a job site, obviously file your workers' comp right away. And also, when we're talking about that, if you get hurt on a construction site, the minute it happens, take out your camera and start snapping away. Snap away at the pic of the ladder that was defective.
If you can.
The scaffold, if you can. The pictures of anything that around the accident scene, take pictures of, and just take down the names of anybody that was working in the area at the time, because that's going to come in handy. But
if you can't, let me add to that. I always have them call their coworkers to do it while the evidence is still fresh, because usually they develop some kind of a camaraderie or a friendship with their coworkers. And they are all sort of in the same boat. One guy gets hurt, he feels bad for the other guy. So you have his cell phone always. Call your buddy while you're in the hospital. Say, Bill, remember that ladder? Get some pictures of it, or that spot, or that pipe, whatever it was. Take pictures of that. But I think that's really important to do that.
I think really important also, and it comes up all the time, is that especially on the union jobs, right? The unions are strong and powerful. On any of the union jobs, there's a shop steward, right? On every job, the shop steward has power. And I see a lot of times that if it's not the shop steward, it's some other union rep trying to steer the injured worker to a particular law firm. Not because they're the greatest, but because there's some type of relationship between that firm.
That kind of relationship.
Yeah, here we go.
Green relationship.
And so not out of concern for the injured worker,
right?
But I don't know if there's kickbacks or whatever. I don't know, but I hear about parties.
All out evil.
Yeah, I hear about parties and vacations and everything else that's going on, steering and directing people to particular law firms. Listen, get your own independent law firm that's looking out just for you.
Mm.
Right. And not only that, as far as the comp, I wouldn't even file the comp until you talk to us, because then they want you to make statements as to how things happen. You know, if you should, the sooner you can get us involved, the better. And we have a comp department also that we can steer you to. And we have no problem handling both of those things. We work side by side with other lawyers, and you know, the sooner you get both cases going and the comp case in sync with your third party case, the sooner you do that, the better.
Gentlemen, we're just going to close out the show. I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to give you sort of like your closing remarks. Mark, I'll give you the floor first.
Yeah, my closing remark is simple. If you get hurt, if you have a friend or a family member or a coworker that gets injured on doing any type of work in the trades, call us. Free. A free evaluation of what happened to you. We will carefully listen to you. We'll take it seriously. And with our knowledge and experience of the law, we'll be able to tell you whether or not you have a valid case against a general contractor or an owner in addition to your workers' compensation case. But the sooner you call us, the better, because things change. Evidence disappears, co-workers disappear. Let us get involved, track down the evidence, talk to the witnesses, and start the building blocks of that case for you before it's too late.
I would 100% agree with what Mark said, and I don't think there's really much to add to that. I see that you're flashing the emails. Please put mine up there. Very easy to figure out the emails in our firm. It's no mystery. It's the first initial of the first name and then their last name at Buttafuoco Law. So if you want Jim McCarthy, it's jmccarthy@buttafuocolaw.com. Mark Freeley, M. Freeley at Buttafuoco Law, and so on and so forth. So you can always find us. And you can email us, you can text us, you can call us, you can send us a video of yourself, whatever you want to do, whatever your preferred method of communication, smoke signals, just get a hold of us and we'll be happy to help you any way we can. We've gone all over the place. We've had cases in Alaska. We've had cases in Washington State. We've had cases in Hawaii and Florida. We just got one yesterday in Georgia. I mean, we get them all over the place. Wherever people are hurt, we're there to help.
Well, gentlemen, I just want to once again thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. This was a fantastic episode. I appreciate you guys sharing. You guys are a wealth of knowledge on this topic. So thank you again for joining us on Ask Your Injury Lawyers.
Yep. Thank you, Rob. We're blessed.
Take care, Rob. Bye-bye, Dan.
Bye.
And everyone else who tuned in, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of Ask Your Injury Lawyers, where we got to feature both Mark Freeley and Dan Buttafuoco, and we really just dove deep on the topic of labor law, construction site injuries, any type of injury related to the trade industry. And if you have any further questions that maybe we did not get addressed today, again, we want to encourage you to reach out to the attorneys at Buttafuoco Associates. They're all available, and as Mark and Dan were sharing today, they believe accessibility is a big part of being successful on behalf of their clients. So you can go ahead and reach out to them by visiting, and I'll put it on the screen, by going to 1-800-NOW-HURT.com, or you can call the law firm at 1-800-669-4878. Once again, thanks so much for tuning in to Ask Your Injury Lawyers. Take care.